Finally, free from any more baggage. Today marks the beginning of our life together with my parents at my house. However, as soon as my parents passed away, my husband, who had demolished our family home, dropped a bombshell on me. Standing in front of the now non-existent house, he declared, "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind too? Come to our house with the inheritance. Quick." His words left me dumbfounded, and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ah, I see. That's what this was all about. Perplexed, my husband, Howard, and my in-laws looked at me incredulously. What? Why are you laughing? I revealed the truth to them. My name is Deborah Jackson. I was born into an ordinary salaried worker family. I married Howard at 29, raised 2 children, and now, at 55, I expected a quiet life with my husband. But life took an unexpected turn. I recounted the challenges of caring for my ailing parents, particularly my mother's battle with cancer. Despite my efforts, my husband's reaction to living with my sick mother was unexpected and less than supportive. I suggested living with my mother for her sake, but Howard was reluctant. His complaints about meals, cleaning, and laundry were hurtful. Despite the challenges, we moved to my family home to care for my mother, even though Howard's initial attitude remained unchanged. As time passed, my mother's health deteriorated, leading to her hospitalization and eventual passing. Despite the emotional turmoil, Howard's lack of support during the funeral preparations left me deeply disappointed. In times like these, one wishes for their spouse's support. However, Howard was off to the side with his parents, not helping with the funeral preparations. Even during the funeral, he remained at the back of the relatives section. "Howard, I wish you would sit in the family area." I couldn't help but wish for the support that never came. When I suggested that Howard should sit with me in the family area during my mother's funeral, he responded, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all." His mother, who was listening, interjected, "He's your husband, but not your mother's son, right? Howard is my son, so he's an outsider. An outsider, that's right. Howard's parents are just us. Deborah should sit in the family area alone." Even his parents echoed the sentiment, stating that Howard should not be in the family area. While seating arrangements for family members may vary by region, in our area, it's customary for sons-in-law to sit in the family area. Predictably, with Howard not in the family area, distant relatives started whispering and speculating about our relationship. After the funeral, we returned home with my brother's family, children, Howard, and his parents. Despite their insensitive remarks, I thanked Howard's parents for coming and served them coffee. However, their callousness reached new heights when they casually remarked about the condolence money being tough on them, implying relief at the end of the financial burden with my mother's passing. Stunned by their words, I forced a smile and left the room. Overhearing Howard and his parents' conversation, I learned more about their true feelings. Howard complained about living with someone else, and his parents joined in mocking me. It wasn't the first time. They had always been disrespectful, even during our marriage, reflecting on their lack of concern during my father's funeral and mother's death. I questioned Howard's behavior as a person. I realized that I had been overly considerate of him, feeling guilty for imposing the living arrangement. Angry and resentful, I silently listened to their laughter and chatter. Later, in a conversation between Howard and his parents, they openly disapproved of my defiance regarding my mother's belongings. When they tried to take my mother's bag, I firmly refused, stating my intention to distribute her keepsakes among family members later. This led to a heated argument, with Howard and his parents leaving angrily, labeling me an outsider. Despite explaining the situation to everyone, Howard didn't return home for some time. When he finally did, he surprised me by showing concern and suggesting a trip for me and the kids, even providing travel vouchers. Though unexpected, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, including gratitude and confusion, at this unexpected gesture from Howard. I wonder if your father felt guilty. I said with a laugh as I decided to gratefully accept the travel vouchers from Howard. Well, I'll beat off then. Yeah, take your time. Since you're at it, stay over at the kids' places, Howard suggested. I can't be away that long, I replied. Just go. I'll relax at my parents' house. Don't worry about me, Howard said, sending me off with those words. Julia was happy to have me over. So before the trip, I visited Julia's and then Luke's homes, having been unable to visit while caring for my mother. I helped out a bit by making and freezing some meals for them. Mom, you don't get to relax at all, but thank you. It really helps. They both expressed gratitude for my home-cooked meals. This was all thanks to Howard's suggestion. Then came the long-awaited trip, and I spent a relaxing time at the hotel with my children. It seemed to heal much of the fatigue and sorrow from caregiving and losing my parents. I was away for nearly a week, but both kids returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while, Julia suggested. Really? Once in a while? But I wonder if he's up to something, I laughed, half-jokingly. Don't say that. Your father must have had his reasons, Julia replied. I laughed as well, planning to share the memories with Howard and start afresh in our married life. However, upon arriving home, I was at a loss for words. What's going on? The house is... I looked around in confusion, checking my location. Despite being a familiar place, our family home was gone. Then Howard appeared from nowhere, with his parents behind him, smirking at my dumbfounded expression. Howard, what's the meaning of this? I asked. Howard, like his parents, replied with an eerie smile. Finally, the baggage is gone. From today, we'll be living with my parents at my house. What are you talking about? I retorted calmly to Howard's arrogant statement. Then Howard spoke. Lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Come to our house with the inheritance. Already, everything you inherited belongs to Howard. I realized what had happened. The disappearance of my house was Howard's doing, all for the sake of inheritance. Despite being overwhelmed with frustration and sadness, I couldn't let Howard have his way. No way, I thought to myself. I burst into laughter at their smirking faces. What? Why are you laughing? What a strange woman. Has she gone mad? My mother-in-law looked at me as if I were something eerie. I faced them and spoke up. Don't you guys know? Know what? I then said to Howard, first of all, I didn't inherit a single penny, so there's no inheritance. I started laughing again after saying this. Maybe they thought they had become rich through inheritance. Their wild imaginations and actions were simply laughable to me. What do you mean? Explain yourself? Howard demanded an explanation, but I remained silent. I thought there was no need to enlighten them before that. I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it alone. Ignoring Howard's question and rejecting his initial proposition, my mother-in-law flared up in anger. You helped with your parents' household, but you won't do ours. You know why I did that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? I said we didn't need to live together, but you chose to do so because you didn't want to do housework. My rebuttal left Howard and my mother-in-law biting their lips in frustration and demolishing my family home on your own. There are things you can and can't do. I yelled at them on the spot, then left the scene. Behind me, Howard's voice called out, "Where are you going?" However, I didn't turn back. I had to secure a place to sleep for the night, and I didn't want to see Howard's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. It couldn't be that easy to demolish a house. The house was still in my mother's name. When I wondered which company had taken the job, an unbelievable truth came to light. Howard and my father-in-law had directly demolished the house themselves. They had meticulously prepared, enlisting the help of acquaintances from my father-in-law's demolition company and renting heavy machinery. Moreover, they had given me the travel vouchers to drive me out. The realization of being utterly deceived brought tears to my eyes and filled me with frustration. Is there any way to punish the three of them? I asked the lawyer through tears, and he smiled kindly. Your husband, who demolished the house registered under your mother's name without permission, can be charged with criminal damage and sued for compensation. Let's start by demanding a proper apology from your husband and his parents." I nodded at his words, and the lawyer promptly started the proceedings. A few days later, an irate call came from Howard. "What's this letter of demand about?" "Oh, you received it. Since you destroyed our important house, you'll have to compensate for it." "Compensate? I told you we were moving into the family home. I demolished an unused house for you. You should be grateful, not demanding compensation. Just bring your inheritance and come back home." Howard arrogantly insisted. "Grateful for being demolished? Really? And about the inheritance coming home? There's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything." I shouted back over the phone. Howard fell silent, seemingly stunned by my outburst. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was precisely this. I had a whole year to spend with my mother. It was obvious we would have discussed the inheritance. Then I said, "I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother." Thus, all cash and securities were inherited by my brother. He said that I should get the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out to someone else. That was the plan for me to inherit the house anyway. Either you and your father restore the family home to its original state or pay the amount written there. This amount, I'm being kind enough to suggest a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you," I spoke firmly. "Sorry, I didn't think you'd be so angry." "Of course," Howard replied. "I'm angry." Howard began making excuses. He thought that as long as the family home was there, he couldn't live with his parents, especially since his father had always wanted to live with us. My father-in-law was fond of Luke and seemed to have wanted to live with him. He had refused to live together back then because it would have made commuting difficult, but his parents seemed to think I was the one opposed to it. So it turns out that Howard had convinced his parents to agree to this plan by demolishing my family home and making them believe I would move in with the inheritance. But even knowing this now, there's no way I can forgive it. So please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too. If he's truly remorseful, then he'll agree to the settlement." I said this and hung up the phone. Howard kept calling me and sending messages to apologize. "If you're sorry, then hurry up and transfer the money." I pushed Howard away with these words. I knew our family home couldn't be restored, but there was no other way to alleviate these unbearable feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Julia's house. My brother's family and my children knew about this. Even though my brother must have been angry about our family home being demolished without his consent, he said, "I won't interfere, but I'll lend a hand. Do what you think is right, Deborah." Everyone condemned Howard's actions and supported me. A month passed without any payment for the damages or compensation. During that time, there was no contact from Howard. I couldn't keep relying on Julia's hospitality forever. I wanted to receive the money soon and at least establish a stable living situation. But contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed by a comment from Julia. "This apron looks a lot like Grandma's," she muttered while showing me her smartphone screen. I was shocked when I saw the screen. It was a product page on a flea market app. The item Julia thought resembled my mother's apron was a unique piece I had made for my mother. "What? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so there's no mistake, really," Julia said and hurriedly checked other pages. The seller seemed to have registered recently, with no transactions or ratings yet. As I checked the content of the nearly 30 items listed, I was shocked to find that they all belonged to my mother. I immediately realized it must be Howard's doing. No one else but Howard, who had demolished the house, could have taken my mother's belongings. I called Howard right away. "What's this about the app, Howard?" Howard responded, sounding annoyed. Thinking he was playing dumb, I angrily confronted him. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's belongings, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now." Howard sounded panicked as he replied, "What? No, it's not me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back. I hung up and immediately went to Howard's parents' house with Julia. Upon arriving at Howard's parents' house, I immediately called out to Howard. He came out to meet us at the entrance, where I confronted him. "I don't know anything about it," Howard said. "Dad, tell the truth." Julia, supporting me, also pressed Howard for answers. He was visibly flustered. While this was happening, Howard's parents, perhaps realizing we were there, showed up too. "Oh, Julia, you're here?" She smiled happily upon seeing Julia. Julia, clearly upset, spoke to her grandmother. "Tell Dad to tell the truth. The truth. It seems like Dad is selling the stuff Grandma passed away." With hearing this, my mother-in-law laughed. Howard looked troubled and kept repeating, "It's not me." Then my mother-in-law spoke loudly. "Howard selling them? That can't be true." But because I'm the one selling them, I felt the blood drain from my face at her words. Howard must have known. He looked at his mother with a "this is bad" expression. Julia was stunned, but my mother-in-law seemed cheerful. "What did you say? It's quite a task, you know. Packaging has to be done carefully, and the photos need to be taken well." She talked about the app as if it was a fun hobby, not realizing she was selling stolen items. I struggled to contain my anger. "Cancel the listing. That's not something Grandma can just sell." Julia, red-faced and teary-eyed, appealed to her grandmother, but my mother-in-law seemed displeased. "What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can, and the rest makes a nice little income. It's good for preventing dementia after all. I'm the only grandma left. And Julia, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right?" My mother-in-law said this nonchalantly. It was clear she wouldn't listen to our pleas. But if talking won't work, we'll have to take action. "Let's go home, Julia." "But it's okay." I left the house, dragging Julia with me. And so, I rushed to the police station. I had not planned to file a report about the house being demolished, but theft was a different matter altogether. When I reported the theft and unauthorized sale of my mother's belongings to the police, they promptly took action. The flea market app company cooperated, and my mother-in-law's account was suspended. This ensured that no more items would be sold. On my way back from the police station, I called Howard. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? You're complicit." "No, I've filed a police report. Please cooperate with the investigation." Howard became frantic at my words. "What? We're family, aren't we? Please withdraw it. Strangers, right? I still haven't received any compensation or damages for the house being demolished, and I see no remorse from you." I was angry, and Howard was at a loss for words. But I am not heartless. Despite everything, I had shared a life with Howard for a long time. Sighing, I realized that there might still be a long road ahead to resolve all these issues. I said, "I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. And Howard, your father looked very ill. Has he been to the hospital?" "What? I'm not heartless, so I'm just letting you know." I said this and hung up the phone. I had seen my father-in-law earlier, and he hadn't spoken much. He was much thinner than when I last saw him a few months ago, and his face was pasty and unnaturally dark. It was clear that he was not in good health, but I doubted that the family had noticed. My mother-in-law was nonchalantly trying to sell stolen items, and Howard was only bold towards me. That parent and child simply lacked any sense of consideration for others. The next day, my father-in-law called me. I thought he might thank me, but it was the exact opposite. "You're treating me like a sick person, planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of me, huh? I have to protect Howard and your mother from you. I'm not going to any hospital," he scolded. I was concerned for him, yet this was how he responded. "I apologize if it was out of line. I was just concerned, I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't patronize me." I was angry at his words, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell and went to the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Howard called me in a panic. "Dad has terminal cancer. What should I do?" I snorted. "That's none of my concern. Remember what you said when I suggested the hospital. You said you're not weak and short-lived like my parents. Deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless? Who's the heartless one? Did you ever say a kind word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your own actions. I said this and ended the call. As expected, my father-in-law passed away not long after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor negative feelings towards someone who had passed, but recalling all that had been done and said, I couldn't shed a single tear. After the funeral, a will was found. Despite his claims of not being short-lived, my father-in-law had been thoroughly prepared. The house is to be inherited by my grandson Luke. The rest of my estate is to be divided between my wife and eldest son, it stated. I was surprised to see Luke's name. My father-in-law had always favored Luke, expressing a desire to live with him. Now he must have wanted Luke to live in the house even after his passing. For Luke, this was an unwelcome burden. Renounce the inheritance. You don't want that house, do you? I told Luke, but he was actually pleased to inherit the house. Inheriting the house would only mean paying inheritance taxes, with no real benefit for Luke. However, if he was happy with it, it wasn't my place to say anything. As per his grandfather's will, Luke inherited the house. My mother-in-law was delighted and paid the inheritance tax. He's our heir, after all, she said. Well, that wasn't wrong. I felt a bit down, feeling like Luke was taken from me. But then something unbelievable happened. Come to our house, responding to Howard's message, I immediately went to his parents' house. There, like me once stood, my mother-in-law and Howard, frozen in front of their house. On the property, there were heavy machines, trucks with the demolition company's name, and workers all demolishing the house. What's going on? It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right? Luke, who appeared out of nowhere, seemed pleased watching the house being demolished. Luke, what are you doing? Stop it right now. Even if I stop now, we can't live there anyway, Mom. Luke, what have you done? My mother-in-law and Howard pleaded with Luke, but he just laughed. Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom, Luke? Grandma, you were horrible to Mom too, right? Did you apologize? Luke, his smile gone, glared sharply at his mother and Howard. They fell to their knees as the machines continued to loudly demolish the house. I felt relieved seeing the scene. Later, Howard, having finally received the inheritance, paid the compensation and damages. It seemed that Luke had recovered the stolen items my mother-in-law took from my mother, and they were safely returned to me. Mom, you've got me and Julia, Luke said, and I finally shed tears of relief. Howard and his mother lost their house and were left with no money, now living again in company housing. Howard and I had moved out of the company housing, and now Howard, along with his mother, had returned, becoming the talk of the town. A wife of Howard's colleague, with whom I am on good terms, contacted me, and I explained everything honestly. They'll likely live uncomfortably in the company housing now, but it's their own doing. Furthermore, with Howard's retirement, the two will need to save up for their future living arrangements. I might occasionally ask friends for updates on their situation, just for a story to share. I continue to stay at Julia's house, but Luke is now planning to get married and build a house. The land from his parents' house sold for a decent amount, surprisingly making the demolished house useful. Mom, come live with us. Luke even invited me to live with them. His soon-to-be wife welcomed the idea warmly. I couldn't impose on Julia forever, so I gratefully accepted Luke's offer. I resolved to be a different kind of mother-in-law, hoping to live happily with my new family.